This is no longer just a war, it's a countdown. Ukraine is preparing new strike capabilities, new allies, and production lines aimed straight at the enemy's depth. While diplomats talk about peace, the battlefield is exploding right now. Pokrovsk has turned into a grinder. In Kupansk, Ukraine has outplayed Russia's generals. The enemy is completely encircled, every escape route cut off. There is no way out, no room for maneuver, no second chance. The trap has slammed shut. Russian forces are burning through men and equipment at a pace never seen before, trying and failing to crack Ukrainian defenses. Behind the scenes, something even bigger is taking shape. Billions in frozen Russian money, secret pressure from Washington, sharp divisions inside the EU, and a political fight that could decide who pays for this war. All the details in our special edition of Hotspot. If you want peace, prepare for war. And Ukraine is preparing not only to repel enemy attacks in 2026, but also to strike deep into Russian territory. In particular, Ukraine and Norway will open a joint drone production line in 2026. And that's far from the only bad news for the enemy. Our journalists have more. Watch now.
A new level and scale. Ukraine and Norway have reached an agreement on collaboration in the field of unmanned aerial vehicle production. The corresponding agreement was signed by the Ukrainian side with the Norwegian Minister of Defense. Denis Shmyhal emphasized that this cooperation will become an important stage in expanding Ukraine's production capabilities and strengthening the country's defense capacity. The top priority is the rapid deployment of an experimental production line as early as 2026.
We are gaining access not only to production facilities, but also to the technologies of NATO countries. This also means the opportunity for cooperation in the production of Ukrainian drones and, accordingly, the exchange of experience, as well as in the practical use of Ukrainian interceptor drones. Both strike drones and accordingly they're scaling up.
A similar model of cooperation is also being implemented with the United Kingdom. A few days ago, Kyiv signed a licensing agreement for large-scale production of Octopus interceptor drones at British facilities.
This is an exclusively Ukrainian development, and it already has real-world application in combat conditions. This drone can operate both at night and it is effective against electronic warfare systems, and notably, this drone can operate at low altitudes.
The manufactured interceptor drones will be delivered to Ukraine to strengthen its defense against Russian UAVs. The Octopus project is being implemented as a joint defense industrial initiative. The United Kingdom has obtained a license for mass production of the Ukrainian interceptor, and Ukraine will receive them to enhance its own interception capabilities.
The recently signed agreement comprehensively provides for the extensive production of several thousand crucial interceptor drones for the pressing needs of Ukraine's defense forces, specifically at various specialized enterprises located within the United Kingdom, which effectively eliminates any possibility for the Russian side to successfully destroy the vital defense plants actively manufacturing this essential product.
3 manufacturers have already received the necessary technologies to produce the Octopus drones. Another 11 companies are preparing production lines for them. After the start of Russia's full-scale aggression in 2022, the United Kingdom became one of Ukraine's main partners. London is providing powerful military assistance. In addition, the United Kingdom is actively promoting sanctions pressure on Russia and providing financial support to Kyiv.
The United Kingdom is a pioneer when it comes to practical implementation of so-called coalitions. Drone coalitions, naval coalitions, strike capability coalitions, and accordingly it was the United Kingdom that delivered the first heavy weaponry to the Ukrainian side. In particular, we're talking about the Challenger 2 tank. Only after the corresponding actions by the United Kingdom did the United States deliver its Abrams tanks to the Ukrainian side.
There are also plans in Ukraine to create robotic strongpoints, which will be equipped with combat modules to counter Russian occupiers. First and foremost,
we are talking about the logistics component, meaning ground robots. They will take on the main part of logistics, reducing to zero the losses of personnel and, accordingly, equipment of the defense forces of Ukraine. This refers to the delivery of ammunition and, accordingly, the evacuation of the wounded. Additionally, these are engineering functions such as mining and demining areas.
Earlier, Ukraine, together with the United States, began producing drone interceptors capable of countering Russian strike UAVs. Additionally, the Dutch government will provide €250 million for the purchase of American weapons for Ukraine under the PRL program. In particular, anti-aircraft missiles for F-16s and ammunition, which Kyiv needs most, will be purchased in the United States.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine today. Join us now.
Kupansk, a brilliant checkmate by Ukrainian forces. Russian units have found themselves completely encircled. The Ukrainian armed forces outplayed Moscow's command at every step, resulting in a total collapse of Russia's battlefield tactics. Enemy troops are facing a brutal choice: surrender in groups or be wiped out. Panic is spreading through the ranks, with soldiers abandoning weapons and positions. All the latest developments from the front line. Watch now.
For the second time in just the first half of December, the Russian army has taken Kupansk in the Kharkiv region. This was reported by Russian Defense Minister Belousov. The city is under the control of the Ukrainian armed forces, who are unsuccessfully trying to regain control.
The West military group has taken the strategically important city of Kupansk, which the enemy is unsuccessfully trying to reclaim. Supply roads for Ukrainian armed forces units pass through it.
On pro-Russian social media channels, there are videos allegedly showing Russian soldiers sending greetings from Kupansk.
We, soldiers of the Russian Federation, are on the streets of the Russian city of Kupansk. We send our regards to the expired president.
This is how disrespectfully the Russian occupier addresses the president of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky. And it's simply impossible to tell where exactly this video was recorded.
A soldier could be walking down any street in any city, dressed in uniform, apparently a winter uniform. Why this supposedly proves the footage was shot in Kupiansk, to be honest, I don't understand.
The Ukrainian armed forces, specifically the Kharkiv Brigade, outplayed the Russian command in the Kupiansk direction. Instead of the capture of the city declared by Moscow, the Russian group found itself surrounded with its logistics cut off.
Putin is publicly lying that Russian forces have taken the city. I personally went to Kupiansk to show the world that Putin is lying. Just to show this.
The operation to liberate and clear Kupiansk in the Kharkiv region is ongoing. Russian soldiers are surrendering or being eliminated. There is simply no evidence that the city is under the control of the Russian army.
There is abundant and compelling evidence that the city of Kupiansk has been successfully liberated, with the exception of only a few small isolated areas, specifically minor districts situated within the city itself, where small remaining groups of Russian troops are currently surrounded and contained.
The Ukrainian armed forces have achieved significant successes not only in the Kharkiv region but also in the Donetsk region. A third of all clashes are taking place in this direction, specifically in Pokrovsk. And despite constant attacks by the aggressor, the Ukrainian armed forces managed to gain a foothold in the center of Pokrovsk. Ukrainian fighters succeeded in regaining control over 16 square kilometers in the northern part of the city.
The enemy has been trying to capture Pokrovsk for more than 17 months. However, Ukrainian units are holding the line and seizing the initiative. As a result of counter-offensive actions, they regained control over 16 square kilometers in the northern part of the city. They also recaptured 56 square kilometers of territory in the areas of the settlements of Grishino, Kotlino, and Udaknoye, west of Pokrovsk. Alexander Syrsky, Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces of Ukraine.
The armed forces of Ukraine continue to hold the defense of the Pokrovsk-Myrnohorod agglomeration despite increased pressure from Russian troops and Kremlin statements about full control over Pokrovsk. Intense fighting continues around the clock in the center of Pokrovsk. On this front, cutting off logistics routes with drones is one of the main tactics of Russian forces.
The enemy is trying to strike the route and make rotation impossible, to disrupt logistics to Pokrovsk and thus break through the center. They have not succeeded. On December 10th, they made preliminary attempts to storm with armored columns in the direction of the settlement of Grishino. They were completely destroyed, losing all their armored vehicles as well as light vehicles, motorcycles, and all personnel within an hour. UAF soldier.
In the same Donetsk region, in the Dobropoli direction, the enemy is actively conducting assault operations. Taking advantage of the weather conditions, they are using not only infantry, but also equipment. In one of the latest assaults, the enemy used nearly 2,000 ATVs, infantry, and tried to advance as far as possible. But another assault by the Russian army failed.
Even as they were approaching the positions of the defense forces, the occupiers' assault group was destroyed. The successful joint work of drone units, artillery, and preemptive mining made this assault attempt as unsuccessful as possible.
Despite numerous statements from the command and Z-bloggers about new captures and successful actions, as we can see, the real situation at the front is difficult but under the control of the Ukrainian armed forces.
The battle for Pokrovsk has reached the breaking point. In a desperate bid to smash Ukrainian defenses, Russian forces are suffering unprecedented losses, while simultaneously pushing toward Mirnograd in a risky attempt to tear open the front. Ukraine is holding firm, methodically bleeding the enemy and crushing its offensive momentum. What is unfolding in this sector right now could decide the next stage of the war. Full details in our military overview.
The Ukrainian defense forces have regained control over 16 square kilometers in the northern part of Pokrovsk, the commander-in-chief of the armed forces of Ukraine stated. The commander-in-chief reminded that the Russian army has been trying to capture Pokrovsk for more than 17 months, but the Ukrainian armed forces units are holding the defense and seizing the initiative.
The statement that Pokrovsk and Mirnograd are surrounded is false. Pokrovsk and Mirnograd are not controlled by Russian forces. In other words, Valery Gerasimov claimed control over Pokrovsk as early as October 26th. On October 29th, Putin invited foreign journalists to Pokrovsk. But as of today, we see neither full control over Pokrovsk nor any foreign journalists who could confirm it. Even pro-Russian journalists don't dare to go there to create the propaganda illusion of the city's capture.
Ukrainian soldiers are not only holding the line, but also thwarting the enemy's plans. And here are more shots of the destruction of an enemy mechanized column that was advancing for an assault. The enemy is most active on the western outskirts of the city. The Russians continue to use the tactic of small infantry groups to advance. Although the occupiers are using heavy equipment less and less, they still employ it to speed up their advance and encircle Pokrovsk. The agglomeration also carried out mechanized assaults with the support of aviation and tube artillery. The enemy is also not giving up attempts to cut off logistics.
Russian occupation forces have full control over the southern districts of Pokrovsk. This includes everything south along the M30 highway, which is also known as Defenders of Ukraine Avenue. We're talking about districts like Shakhtyrsky, Yuzhny and Lazurny, Solnechny, as well as the Leontovichi district, Zelenovka, Troyanda, Rosa, the Central Cemetery, and Durnyak. In other words, it is clear that everything located south of the M30 highway is now under the complete and absolute control of the Russian occupiers. This means that Ukrainian forces are currently unable to access or operate in this significant area.
Military forces are also conducting operations to provide air cover for ground logistics routes thanks to the coordinated actions of the defenders. Almost 100% of enemy aerial targets attempting to approach these routes are being destroyed.
The central part of Pokrovsk, specifically within this triangle, allows for its effective use to infiltrate their sabotage groups into other areas. In particular, the Pervomaika district and the Sobachevka district. That is why it is mainly in Pervomaika and Sobachevka that clashes are currently taking place between Russian infiltrated sabotage and reconnaissance groups and our clearing teams. Therefore, to say that the central part of Pokrovsk is under the full control of the Russian occupiers would not be accurate. We cannot say that.
The enemy is also increasing pressure on the southeastern districts of the city of Mirnograd. The military notes that the defense forces continue efforts to stabilize and expand the logistics corridor into the city. In the areas of Svetly and Rovny, there are isolated appearances of enemy groups, which are promptly eliminated.
The defense of Mirnograd continues both in the central and northern parts of the city. The main problem for Mirnograd as of today is logistics. Logistics is a real challenge, a hellish ordeal. We have been tested for our resilience. At the same time, drones, both aerial and ground, are mainly used to support this logistics.
Around 150,000 Russian soldiers have been concentrated in the Pokrovsk-Mirnograd agglomeration. The occupiers are trying to break through the Ukrainian defenses and enter the urban area, but so far they have not succeeded.
Putin needs some kind of epic victory for his so-called New Year's address to the nation. Some sort of epic triumph. Throughout 2025, Russian troops have not gained any operational or tactical advantage over Ukraine's defense forces, and there is nothing to brag about. All Putin can boast about in his New Year's address are reports of capturing tree lines, fields, and a few villages with 10 to 15 houses. which have been almost completely destroyed down to the ground.
If Moscow dares to strike again, it will not face Ukraine alone. A hidden transatlantic plan is already in place, one that would force the United States and Europe to respond with military power. Behind closed doors, security guarantees modeled on NATO's Article 5 are being prepared, turning any future Russian attacks into a trigger for direct Western intervention. What kind of peace is being shaped and on what terms is about to be revealed?
And I believe that right now we are closer to an agreement than ever before.
At this moment, the whole world is watching Ukraine's negotiation process.
Pressure on Russia is our policy. We can clearly see that they are not in the best position. And if our allies did the same, I think we would be very strong from Russia's perspective.
As a result of 2 days of negotiations in Berlin with senior representatives of the US administration, certain progress was achieved.
We have had numerous conversations with Putin. We will see what we can do. We want to save many lives.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky stated that the American side offered security guarantees comparable in their logic to those provided by the North Atlantic Alliance.
It is quite significant that Jared Kushner, a trusted confidant of Donald Trump and someone whom Trump listens to, participated in the negotiations.
According to the New York Times, American and European negotiators have drafted 2 documents to support Ukraine after a potential peace agreement is reached.
An American official, speaking on condition of anonymity, said that the document very specifically outlines how to prevent further invasions and how to punish Russia should they occur.
The key issues remain territorial disputes and Russia's willingness to accept the terms of the agreement.
Right now, in both legislative chambers of government, the current political sentiment leans strongly more towards supporting Ukraine and the need for continued assistance and the pressing need to put significant pressure on Russia and its government. And this, let's say, is driven not only by opposition from Republican Party representatives, but also from Republican voters. Recent polls conducted by the Reagan Institute clearly show that approximately 2/3 of all Americans strongly support Ukraine, and an even greater number unequivocally favor putting sustained pressure on Russia. And it's abundantly clear that, given the context of the forthcoming crucial congressional elections next year, Republicans absolutely cannot overlook this significant factor. And it is evident that they have to take necessary, appropriate steps.
One of the most difficult questions remains the fate of Donbass. The American side proposed considering the option of creating a free economic zone there.
In Europe, there was talk about the need for security guarantees for European contingents from the United States. And it's quite interesting whether there is any progress in this area, and it seems to me that there have indeed been certain changes in the US position in this direction, if they are ready to provide Ukraine with legal security guarantees. Although these legal guarantees do not include military involvement, Russia says, we are ready not to send troops into that part of Donbass from which Ukrainian forces will be withdrawn, but our forces, our National Guard, will enter there. Well, actually, the same forces that are fighting the Kadyrovites belong to the National Guard, just for the record.
According to CNN, the US has proposed a number of ideas to break the deadlock in negotiations. During the discussions, a security guarantee package was thoroughly developed, similar in logic to NATO's Article 5. But Russia is once again opposed.
There is a negotiation process. Our position is clear. Eliminate the root causes. The root causes are the threats to the Russian Federation, which were created by NATO's eastward expansion right up to our borders, and by drawing Ukraine in.
Lukashenko also helps promote the Kremlin's narrative, saying what Russians and Trump need to hear for Putin's money.
Every war ends in peace. Classic, and this war will also end in peace. The sooner it happens, the fewer people will die.
According to American officials, Putin is demanding additional steps aimed at weakening Ukraine's sovereignty.
Trump must finally start putting pressure on Russia. And his words that, well, all sides should make concessions should now be put into action in this direction. Let's hope that Donald Trump will finally move from words to action.
Volodymyr Zelensky emphasized that Ukraine will not give up its sovereignty over these territories, and that any withdrawal of Ukrainian troops is only possible if Russian troops are withdrawn at the same time.
Right now, the ball is in Russia's court. Will it be possible to achieve peace by Christmas so that at the very least hostilities will stop for the duration of the holiday?
Ukraine supported the idea of a ceasefire targeting energy infrastructure during the Christmas holidays. The negotiations are also accompanied by disputes over the use of frozen Russian assets, which could amount to around 200 billion euros by 2027 and are intended to support Ukraine.
We are already seeing attempts to remove reparations and any form of accountability from a potential peace agreement. That is why the international community bears an enormous responsibility. In fact, we are doing more to deprive the Russians of the means to finance this war.
In the US, there is significantly less willingness to hold the Kremlin financially accountable.
The Americans say, leave those Russian assets alone because it's hard to sit down with Putin and talk about compromises while at the same time taking his money. This is the American argument, that we need to be very careful here and not push the situation to the brink.
After the meeting, Zelensky stated that if Moscow rejects the proposals under discussion, he intends to push the US to increase sanctions pressure on Russia.
We have not seen these messages yet. It is well known that such plans exist in the corridors of power in Washington. Any sanctions are detrimental to the process of building relationships.
In addition to sanctions, an important factor for Ukraine is the increase in military aid, including the supply of long-range weapons.
We can see how sensitive this issue is for Russia and how Ukrainian strikes on Russian energy infrastructure are causing systemic harm to the Russian economy as a whole.
The Ukrainian delegation will travel to the United States in the coming days with a plan developed together with the Europeans.
The Trump administration is pressuring EU countries to abandon the plan to use 210 billion euros in frozen Russian assets to finance Ukraine, Politico reports. This pressure has triggered an active debate within the European Union where positions differ sharply. How Europe itself is responding to this pressure and whether Brussels is ready to withstand Washington's demands, coming up next.
Trump is saving Russia money and persuading the EU not to give the frozen assets of the occupying country to Ukraine. According to Politico sources, representatives of the US administration have been convincing European countries loyal to Washington to abandon the plan to use 210 billion euros of frozen Russian assets to support our country.
The US administration has this super idea to create a separate investment fund together with the Russians, or perhaps on other terms, but with the goal of using this investment fund to invest in restoring ties with the Russian economy and utilizing Russian natural resources and so on.
The pressure from the US was described to journalists by high-ranking officials from EU countries who participated in the relevant discussions. The White House denies this information, stating that they are not putting pressure on the Europeans. Moreover, it is claimed that both Kyiv and Moscow have made their positions clear regarding the issue of frozen assets, and Washington's role is limited to facilitating and maintaining dialogue, which could eventually lead to a peace agreement.
If the European Union transfers Russian assets to Ukraine, it will set a precedent. And in this situation, the Americans simply, well, they physically won't be able to politically. It would be political suicide if they were to take the opposite approach and try to do business with Russia on this basis.
Refusing to transfer the frozen Russian assets to the Ukrainians will demonstrate the Europeans' weakness and could even weaken Kyiv's position in peace negotiations. Moreover, if the assets are not transferred next year, Ukraine could face a budget deficit of 71.7 billion euros.
Support for Ukraine in this war has in fact been articulated by leading European political leaders. Well, essentially, this is an investment and, in a way, a defining factor for overall European security. Otherwise, Europe will need to prepare very seriously, and in fact, preparations are already underway to confront potential Russian aggression, but the risks will increase significantly if, for example, Ukraine does not receive support and there are some unfavorable outcomes.
Last week, the European Union made a decision to freeze Russian assets indefinitely in order to eliminate the risk of their return to Moscow. Now, Russian money will remain in Europe until the Kremlin ends the war against Ukraine and pays for the destruction inflicted on the country.
Let me remind you that a significant sum is also under the jurisdiction of the United States. And here again, it is possible that everything will depend on the strength, confidence, and persistence of the European partners when it comes to how the Americans will handle this portion.
After the war began, the European Union froze about 260 billion euros of Russian assets. The majority of these, around 190 billion euros, are held in the Belgian depository Euroclear.
Today, Euroclear and accordingly the state of Belgium, where it is located, which could potentially be subject to certain financial sanctions, are primarily concerned that any actions taken with these assets, such as transferring them to Ukraine or to a third party, in other words, alienating them from the Russian Federation with whom agreements have been signed, should all remain within the legal framework so that it would be impossible to challenge these actions or to invoke international law against them. It may indeed sound quite paradoxical, but by cleverly exploiting existing conflicts and ambiguities within the intricate framework of international law, the aggressive country could, at least theoretically and in a court of law, assertively claim that the financial depository is legally and unequivocally obliged to return these specific funds.
The idea to use frozen Russian assets to buy weapons and as compensation for Ukraine was proposed in the spring of 2022. There is still no unified decision on this matter.
At this moment, that's all from me, Maria Farafonova. Even more hellish Frontline news in our next episode. But for now, don't forget to subscribe and click the like button. See you soon!